Welcome to this explainer. Today we are tracing an absolutely gripping, turbulent story of survival and evolution. When we look at the history of Eastern Europe, we usually see this constant shifting of borders, with empires rising and falling over centuries. But the story of the Romanian state? It's entirely unique. It is a tale of absolute resilience. We're talking about a nation that literally forged its modern identity while trapped directly in the crossfire of history's most relentless conquerors.
Think about this central paradox for a second. Here we have a distinct Latin island weathering wave after wave of external invaders. Throughout its history, this region was completely surrounded by Slavic and Eastern empires. You had the Ottomans to the south, the Austro-Hungarians to the west, and the massive Russian Empire right to the east. Yet, despite being geographically cut off from the rest of the Latin-speaking world, this unique culture didn't just hold its ground, it eventually built a modern, unified nation-state. I mean, how is that even possible?
Well, what's truly fascinating is that this identity is grounded way back in the ancient world, long before the modern state was even a thought. The absolute bedrock of the culture is a concept known as Romanism. It's essentially the historical and cultural mashup of the indigenous Dacian tribes and the ancient Romans, which all kicked off after Emperor Trajan conquered the region in 106 AD. Now, the Romans actually packed up and left a little under 2 centuries later, but that cultural fusion, it stuck. And get this, the roots of human settlement here go back even further. We're talking about some of the absolute oldest European stone tools ever found, dating all the way back to a mind-blowing 500,000 BCE.
So, moving into what we could call an incredibly long, dark night for the region.
Following that Roman withdrawal, the local populations were left brutally exposed to endless invasions. It really fractured the Romanian people into distinct principalities. Wallachia was established around 1290, and Moldavia followed in 1359. But the thing is, they were never truly left alone to govern themselves. By the 15th century, Wallachia was forced to become an Ottoman tributary, and by the 17th century, Moldavia had fallen completely under Ottoman influence. The whole region essentially became a highly volatile buffer zone, just constantly caught in a vicious tug-of-war between the Ottoman, Russian, and Austro-Hungarian empires.
For literally centuries, the everyday reality for these folks was just grim. They were living as fragmented vassal states, dealing with heavy foreign taxation, and facing severe cultural suppression from whoever was in charge at the moment. Yet, out of that massive struggle, and really fueled by broader 19th century European trends, this powerful countervision emerged. They called it the unification ideal. It was a bold, almost impossible dream of pulling all Romanian-speaking people out from under these foreign yokes and bringing them together into a single independent nation-state.
Fast forward a bit, and we hit this incredible awakening, the moment that dream actually started to materialize. Decades of yearning for unity finally collided with the horrific realities of global conflict. The outbreak of World War I, while devastating, actually provided a historically unprecedented opportunity. Following the Great Union of 1918, which miraculously brought Transylvania, Bessarabia, and Bukovina together with the Old Kingdom, the country's population essentially doubled overnight. It skyrocketed from 7.7 million to 15.7 million people. The gross national product doubled right along with it. This was the breathtaking real-world realization of that 19th century dream, the birth of Greater Romania.
But, we can't talk about this triumph without acknowledging the bill. It did not come for free. Securing Greater Romania required a staggering, truly devastating human cost. The nation fought with absolute determination, enduring brutal invasions and harsh treaties, before the tide of the war finally turned in their favor. It left the newly expanded nation deeply scarred, suffering over 250,000 military deaths and nearly 500,000 civilian casualties. The wealth and blood of the entire nation were essentially mortgaged to achieve physical unity.
Tragically, though, that golden era of Greater Romania was incredibly short-lived.
The chaotic geopolitical machinations of World War II and the Cold War that immediately followed absolutely tore the nation apart once again. Just wrap your head around this stat for a second. Driven by the 1939 German-Soviet Non-Aggression Pact and the violent regional conflicts that spun out of it, the country shockingly lost 62% of its territory and 35% of its population. They were caught right between the crushing weight of the Axis powers on one side and the advancing Soviet Red Army on the other, ultimately falling entirely under Soviet influence by the time the dust settled.
And that Soviet influence? It paved the way for a brutal, self-isolating communist dictatorship. Eventually, the regime fell under the absolute control of Nicolae Ceaușescu, who famously, and let's be honest, quite self-importantly, dubbed himself the genius of the Carpathians. Under his rule, it became a tyrannical regime that brought terror straight into the homes of ordinary citizens, becoming brutally invasive in practically every aspect of everyday life.
It's crucial to understand just how fundamentally this altered Romanian society. Decades of historical capital were systematically wiped out to force through rapid industrialization. Massive political purges swept across the nation, with entire prison systems set up specifically for dissidents. Ethnic and religious minorities faced extreme suppression. And wildly, the state isolated itself not just from the capitalist West, but eventually from the Soviet Union too. Casting a dark, terrifying shadow over all of this was the Securitate, the secret police force that maintained ubiquitous monitoring over everyone. You couldn't trust anyone.
Well, as we know, a pressure cooker is going to blow eventually. Decades of severe economic deprivation and strict political control finally exploded in December 1989. It all kicked off with protests erupting in the city of Timisoara. Now, the regime responded exactly how you'd expect, with a violent, lethal crackdown by the Securitate. But this time, instead of forcing people back into line, it triggered a massive nationwide uprising. The situation escalated so rapidly that the Ceaușescus literally had to flee by helicopter. They were quickly captured, subjected to a rapid trial, and executed on December 26th. That moment broadcast the definitive, shocking end of the totalitarian era to the entire world.
Okay, but here's the thing. Suddenly removing a dictator doesn't instantly fix your country. The immediate aftermath in the 1990s was disorganized and just deeply painful. We're talking about inflation skyrocketing to nearly 300%. Decades of state-owned industrial capital were rapidly and often chaotically privatized, sold off for pennies on the dollar, which caused widespread poverty. However, slowly but surely structural reforms did start taking root. Price liberalization happened, competitive goods markets began to emerge, and an amazing 300,000 new private companies were established as the nation painfully clawed its way toward a functional free market economy.
Fast forward to today, and it is almost a full circle moment. Modern Romania has integrated itself deeply into the exact same Western democratic structures it was once completely cut off from. It is now a highly vital member of NATO and the European Union and engages in deep strategic cooperation with the USA. Plus, remember how vulnerable their borders were historically? Well, today, they've transformed those perimeters into highly secured frontiers, adapting strict EU border control legislation to manage the complex realities of modern cross-border migration.
Which brings us to a really fascinating thought to close out our explainer today. Romania survived being the perpetual battleground of crushing empires. It endured a brutal 20th century dictatorship, and it successfully navigated an incredibly chaotic transition to democracy. So looking ahead, how will a nation that was forged in such a relentless crucible use its hard-won voice and its completely unique, resilient Latin identity to shape the future of the European Union and the modern world at large? It is an ongoing story, and honestly, it's one we should all absolutely be paying attention to.